What You Don't Know. You Don't Know is the podcast that digs into the fascinating, the forgotten, and the flat-out weird corners of science, religion, politics, psychology, history, and more. Hosted by a curious duo, each episode is a lively and thought-provoking conversation that'll leave you saying, "How did I not know that?" If you're into peeling back layers, questioning what you thought you knew, or just love a smart and engaging chat, then this podcast is for you. So listen in, get curious, and know more. New episodes every week. Don't miss out on what you didn't even know you were missing. Like and subscribe.
Okay, picture this. Strasbourg, summer, 1518. It's incredibly hot. And this woman, Fratre Fay, she just steps out into the street and starts dancing.
Right, but not like, joyful dancing.
No, not at all. It's fierce, sort of relentless. She can't stop. It goes on for hours, then days.
And there's no music playing or anything.
Nothing, just her. And then others start joining in, one by one.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, soon you've got dozens, maybe even hundreds, all caught in the same frantic, uncontrollable movement, dancing until they're injured, exhausted. Some apparently even collapse.
It sounds completely unreal, like something out of a film.
Exactly, but it actually happened. It's the dancing plague of 1518, utterly baffling.
It really is one of those historical moments that just makes you ask, how? How could that happen? What was going on in people's minds?
Precisely, and that's what we want to unpack in this deep dive. We've got some great sources here, detailed historical accounts, analyses of the social situation back then.
And John Waller's book, A Time to Dance, A Time to Die, which is, pretty highly regarded for pulling together the evidence.
Right. So our goal is to sift through all this, try to understand the context, look at the theories old and new, and maybe figure out what this bizarre episode tells us about, well, us, about human behavior.
And we have to acknowledge up front, there are gaps. The historical record isn't perfect, which makes looking closely at the sources we do have even more important.
Absolutely. It's part of the fascination, really. Okay, so before the dancing itself, Strasbourg. What was it like back then, early 1500s?
Well, it wasn't some quiet little town. Strasbourg was actually a major hub.
Right, on the Rhine River. Big for trade.
It's huge, especially grain and wine. It was a key point connecting different parts of Europe. So economically important, but also politically quite complex.
And socially. I gather things were pretty tense.
Incredibly volatile, yeah. You had this history of conflict, like the city officials clashing with the bishop. Remember the Battle of Hausbergen? They essentially kicked the church out of political power inside the city.
Okay. And the government itself was complicated. Lots of councils.
Yeah, the Senate, the Council of Exof Date, the Exeva, layers of governance. But the average person, peasants, laborers, the innwanners, they had very few rights, very little power.
Getting citizenship was hard.
Really hard and expensive. So you had these deep social divisions.
And life for the peasantry sounds pretty brutal.
Oh, absolutely. The sources talk about repeated crop failures, weird climate stuff leading to famine, like a really bad one back in 1492.
So people were starving.
Starving under huge pressure from landlords, some basically living as serfs. And then new taxes kept getting slapped on them. The poor always got hit hardest.
And layered on top of that was religion, right? The church's role.
Hugely influential. It touched everything. But there was also this growing resentment. People saw the clergy living in luxury while they struggled.
And the clergy weren't exactly pitching in.
Paid minimal taxes, didn't want to contribute more to defending the city. It bred bitterness.
Plus, they had this ultimate threat. Excommunication.
Yeah, and you have to understand, people believe things like disease and famine were God's punishment for sin. So not paying your tithes could literally mean, in their minds, risking divine wrath, being cast out. It linked money worries directly to, existential terror.
Wow. And people weren't just taking it lying down. There were uprisings.
There were. The Bundschuh Revolts, 1493, 1502, 1517. Figures like Jos Fritz tried to lead peasants against the system.
But they failed?
Brutally crushed. Mass executions left this feeling of utter hopelessness, deep depression among the poor.
Okay, so you've got poverty, oppression, failed revolts, and then disease on top of it all.
Constantly. Syphilis was rampant, seen as God's whip, punishment for lust, caused horrible pain, ulcers.
Nasty. And the plague was around too.
Bubonic plague had hit before, yeah. And then just the year before, 1517, this thing called the English sweat arrived.
What was that?
Sounds terrifying. Acute anxiety, shivering, exhaustion, intense thirst, and often you just died really quickly.
Good grief.
And the city itself. Sanitation was basically non-existent. Animal waste, human waste in the streets, butcher's blood going into the river people drank from. It was a breeding ground for disease.
So putting it all together.
Yeah, the key insight here is Strasbourg in 1518 wasn't just poor or unlucky. It was a society under extreme, prolonged, multifaceted stress. Psychological stress, like a pressure cooker just waiting to blow.
That context makes the dancing seem, well, maybe not logical, but perhaps more understandable as some kind of societal reaction. Okay, so Frau Treffe starts mid-July, 1518.
Right, outside her house. Just suddenly starts this intense, uncontrollable dancing. No music.
And it goes on for days, like
Yeah.
4 to 6 days straight.
That's what some sources say, yeah. Imagine the state she must have been in. Feet bleeding, bruised, shoes literally filling with blood.
And people watching, what did they think?
Evil spirits, witchcraft, the devil's work. That was the immediate reaction.
And this idea of St. Vitus's dance came up.
Yeah, immediately. Which is fascinating, because St. Vitus was this double-edged figure. People prayed to him against plague and epilepsy.
For the falling sickness. Yeah.
Right. But they also believed he could punish sinners
Hmm.
by inflicting this compulsive dancing. So the very name carried this threat, this explanation for what they were seeing.
So Frau Treffe's dancing, people whispering St. Vitus, and then it spreads.
Within days, yeah. The reports say over 30 others joined her. Some seem to have just mimicked her movements, described as dancing so monomaniacally that only death would have the power to intervene. It just caught on.
And it grew from there. This is where the numbers get a bit fuzzy, right?
Exactly. By August, it peaked.
Yeah.
But the estimates vary wildly. Some sources say maybe 50 people, others go as high as 400. It's hard to know for sure.
But the descriptions of what it looked like, they're pretty vivid.
Oh, yeah. Spasms, convulsions, people drenched in sweat, thrashing their arms violently, eyes vacant.
And their feet bleeding.
Yeah, blood pooling in their shoes. And apparently some were crying out for help, like they were trapped inside their own bodies.
Which brings us to the really grim question. Did people actually die from this?
This is a really crucial point of uncertainty. Some later accounts, the ones Waller cites, talk about maybe 15 deaths a day at the peak.
Later accounts, though, what about records from the time?
That's the key thing. The actual contemporary Strasbourg city records, the chronicles written then, they don't mention a specific death toll. They don't even explicitly confirm anyone died from the dancing.
So no definitive proof of deaths in the original sources.
Not directly linked to the dancing, no. It seems plausible, I mean, the exhaustion alone.
Heart attack, stroke, collapse.
Exactly. Those are the suggested causes if deaths did occur. But the idea of dozens or hundreds dying seems to stem from later interpretations, not contemporary evidence. It shows how history can get, well, embellished.
Okay, so the city authorities are faced with this escalating strangeness. What do they do?
Their first move seems really odd to us now. They called in the doctors.
And the doctor said,
They diagnosed it as a natural disease
Hmm.
caused by overheated blood.
Overheated blood. Okay, and the cure.
Was basically let them dance it off. Seriously. Dance themselves free of it,
You're kidding. That sounds incredibly counterproductive.
doesn't it? But they went all in. They opened up guild halls, hired musicians to play.
It brought in music.
Yeah, thinking maybe that was what was missing. They even assigned strong people to hold the dancers up so they wouldn't collapse.
And, surprise, surprise,
It backfired spectacularly. Giving them space and music just seemed to encourage it, make it worse. It validated the behavior.
okay, so plan A failed miserably. What next?
They did a complete U-turn. The council banned all public dancing, banned music,
Right, shut it down.
and then they went for a religious solution. They ordered the dancers to go on a pilgrimage
Where?
to the shrine of St. Vitus up in Saverne, the very saint they thought was causing it.
Facing the problem head on, I guess. Was there a specific ritual?
Oh yes, very specific. They had to wear red shoes sprinkled with holy water. Crosses were painted on the shoes. They held little crosses. There was incense, priests chanting Latin incantations.
Huh.
The whole works.
Wow. A real performance. Did it work?
Apparently, yes. Word got out that the ritual was successful, that St. Vitus had forgiven the dancers, and gradually the dancing subsided. It was pretty much over by September.
One source mentioned something interesting, didn't it? About the attention the dancers received in Saverne.
Yeah, the prayers, the focus, just being treated differently than their usual oppressed lives, that might have been part of the cure. A psychological element, perhaps.
It's such a strange sequence of events, but even with these accounts, the actual cause is still up for debate, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The mystery hasn't gone away. Modern science and history still grapple with it.
So what are the main theories now? Ergot poisoning is one, right?
That's a big one. Ergot, the fungus on damp rye.
Which was used for bread and beer back then.
Exactly. And it contains ergotamine, which is chemically related to LSD. So it's suggested for other weird historical events too, like maybe Salem.
But there are problems with that theory.
The main criticism, which Waller really emphasizes, is about the physical capability. Severe ergot poisoning causes nasty symptoms, spasms, gangrene, hallucinations. But it usually makes people too sick, too physically incapacitated to dance nonstop for days.
Right, they wouldn't have the stamina.
Probably not that kind of coordinated, prolonged stamina, no.
Okay, so if not ergot, what's the leading alternative? Mass psychogenic illness.
That's the one Waller and many others lean towards, sometimes called mass hysteria.
How does that work exactly?
It's basically when a group of people starts exhibiting similar, often bizarre physical symptoms or behaviors, and it spreads like a contagion, but without an organic cause like a germ or poison. It's seen as a real physical manifestation, a movement disorder, even but triggered psychologically.
And this theory seems to fit the Strasbourg situation.
It fits the context remarkably well, actually, when you remember everything we talked about earlier.
The extreme stress.
Exactly. The starvation, the diseases, the social injustice, the fear of God's wrath, the trauma of failed revolts. It was immense psychological pressure.
And people were deeply superstitious.
Deeply. Plus, get this. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened in that region. Sources mention about 7 other dancing plagues in the area during the medieval period.
Really? 7 others?
Yeah. So it suggests this kind of collective response wasn't entirely unprecedented there.
So Waller thinks it was like a mass stress-induced psychosis.
That's his speculation, yeah. Manifesting as chorea, those involuntary dance-like movements. The word chorea itself comes from the Greek for dance. It wasn't a conscious choice, but maybe the body's desperate response to unbearable mental strain.
It's a compelling explanation tying the event back to the environment.
It is. But, the mystery isn't totally solved. Whatever the cause, though, it's clear why this story still grabs us.
Oh, definitely. It pops up everywhere. Films, documentaries, music. Florence plus the Machine has a song called Choreomania.
Grimm, Salvo, Lorene, and Olafur Arnold's, too. Graphic novels, books. It just captures the imagination. It's so fundamentally weird.
And maybe serves as a kind of historical warning or case study.
I think so. About social contagion, mass hysteria, how powerful belief systems are, how psychology, culture, and even physical health are all tangled together.
And like you said about Waller's work, studying it teaches us something about dealing with history itself, right? Working with the evidence, but admitting what we don't know.
Exactly. That humility about the gaps in our knowledge is crucial.
Which brings us back to those specific gaps we mentioned.
Right. We're still not 100% sure about the very first dancer. Frautrefes seems likely, but some accounts are less specific.
And the exact number of dancers involved. Was it 50? Was it 400? The sources just aren't consistent.
And that really significant question about the deaths. Did people die? How many? The contemporary records just don't give us a clear answer, despite what later stories might claim.
So we've traced this incredible story from the pressures building in Strasbourg to Frautrefes' first steps, the terrifying peak, the strange attempts at a cure, and the modern efforts to make sense of it all.
And it remains this fascinating, slightly chilling historical puzzle. Mass psychogenic illness seems to fit the grim context really well, offering a plausible mechanism.
But the absolute certainty, the fine details, they're still elusive, still shrouded in that historical fog.
Yeah. But even without all the answers, the dancing plague is this stark reminder of how collective stress, belief, and psychology can interact in truly unpredictable, powerful ways we're still trying to fully grasp.
It really makes you think about the limits of human endurance, both mental and physical.
Absolutely. Think about it. Was that incredible physical output a sign of some deep resilience? Or was it more like a desperate dissociative escape? A trance state born from suffering that was just too much to bear consciously?
What is the mind capable of making the body do when pushed to extremes we can hardly even conceive of today?
Well, that's a wrap. Hope you liked the episode.